So this happened while I was still living in St. Louis. I've since moved to Chicago. 2016 was a wild year for me, full of coming out of my shell and self-discovery. I found myself becoming more comfortable with using applications such as Grindr or Scruff to meet men online. I had social anxiety, and so I had trouble meeting them elsewhere. One night, I got a message from a seemingly average dude. He was very nice, super funny, and was able to hold a conversation well. He was also not bad looking at all. I was intrigued and kept the conversation going. There were virtually no red flags about him, and so I ended up exchanging numbers with him. We get to texting, and after a week or so of solid conversation, we decided to meet up at a local cafe. I put on my best damn shirt, clean underwear, and hit the road. I was real excited. I was busy during the day though, so we planned to meet at a local cafe around 8 p.m. or so. He didn't live in the city like I did, so he was a bit unfamiliar with the area. When we met, I was immediately enamored with this guy. He was cute, he made me laugh, and to my surprise, he was exactly who his photograph said he was. Nothing was strange about this guy. He was actually a real cutie pie, and I was digging him. And by the feel of things, he was digging me too. What a twist. At one point during the night, we were sharing memes with each other over the table. I showed him one of the funniest I had saved up in my photos. He nonchalantly grabbed my phone from me to take a closer look. He started swiping on my phone for a minute. At this point, I didn't really think anything of it. I just assumed he was looking at the other memes I had saved. No big deal. He gave me back my phone and then proceeded to show me some on his phone this time. The man had a folder of saved memes on his iPhone. A true godsend. Let me tell you, a folder just for memes. Anyway, the night goes on and the cafe was closing, so we decided to leave. As we were walking out together, he asked if I still wanted to hang out. I didn't feel comfortable letting him know where I lived just yet though, so we drove around the city listening to music and talking. Shit like that. It was again pretty normal. We were laughing, joking around. At one point during the night, he just turns to me at a red light and asks me, "Do your roommates know you're on a date right now?" I laughed at this and said, "No, why, are you gonna kill me?" I guess I read way too many stories because that was my immediate reaction. He just laughed and said, "I would use them as an emergency backup if I were you." "You're probably right," I shot back, and we continued with the night. It was nearing midnight, and I had to do laundry the next day. I mentioned that we should probably head home soon. He offered to drop me off at my house, but again, I didn't want him to know where I lived just yet. Instead, I asked if he could drop me off at the train. He politely agreed. When I got home that night, I was pretty thrilled with how things had turned out. It went pretty well, and we were totally into each other. I opened our conversation to shoot him a text message when I noticed at the bottom of our conversation was a notification. "You started sharing your location with him at time." I thought this was a little bit odd since I'd never used that feature before, but maybe I'd turned it on by accident. I turned it off right away. I sent him a follow-up message saying I had a really great time and would love to meet up with him again, but he didn't respond. I assumed he was just busy and started browsing through the internet like the senseless fuck I am. I woke up the next morning prepared to do my chores, washing my bed sheets, buying groceries, going to therapy. The grocery store was my last stop. I was ringing up all of my necessities when guess who was also in the self-checkout line? It was that guy. Wow, imagine that. He immediately came over and struck up a conversation with me. I thought this was a bit odd, as he'd previously mentioned he didn't live in the city and was very unfamiliar with the area. It was harmless so far though, so I let it slide. A few weeks went by and the conversation dwindled down. We started talking less and less. I was used to this happening though, I guess, so I just let it happen without pushing for any answers. Eventually, we stopped talking altogether. One night, I'm home alone sitting down watching cartoons when there's suddenly a knock at the door. It was very late at night, so I didn't feel comfortable answering. I sat there for a moment hoping they'd just go away. They knocked again and again though, more urgently this time. I peeked out through the peephole and could see 2 figures there. My heart immediately dropped as I recognized the guy in a hoodie hat combo. He had an extremely defined jaw, so I was able to immediately recognize him. I freaked the fuck out and called one of my roommates to come home. It was an urgent situation. When Andrew came home, he told me he didn't see anybody near the apartment complex. I calmed down a bit and explained the entire situation. It was during this period that I realized he found out where I lived by the location sharing that he turned on while we were at the cafe. Because I hadn't noticed until I got home, he had plenty of time to figure out my coordinates, especially if he was watching the map immediately after he dropped me off at the train station. He never showed up again after this particular occurrence, and I never heard from him again either. When I went to check, I noticed that our conversation had disappeared from Grindr altogether, and I couldn't find his profile either, so I'm assuming he must have blocked me. I still have no idea what he was planning to do, but I assume he was going to at the very least try and rob me. This happened to me when I was a kid, 10 years old to be exact. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we frequently traveled to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt, the kidnapping capital of the world at that point in time. We were there for a long weekend. We only lived like 2 or 3 hours away. It was late at night and we were staying at the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi/shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. For some reason, our driver never showed though, so we were forced to find a regular taxi to take us there. Of course, it took us forever to find that late at night. We finally found one that was offering a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters there. Instead, they just give flat rates that they choose. We headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, another taxi basically T-bones us right in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it wasn't really that surprising we got hit, I suppose. In Arab nature, the 2 drivers got out of their cars, each screaming that it was the other's fault, looking like they were about to throw hands at any moment. Eventually, they got back into their respective taxis though and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback. We had been in Egypt less than 2 hours, and it was already turning out to be quite the adventure. We finally got to the hotel, exhausted, as it must have been 3 a.m. by this point. Our driver helped us get all our bags out and get settled, and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he would offer to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed since they were already on our agenda anyway, and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember quite when that was. Flash forward to sometime the next morning though. Everyone was ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie, right when he said he'd be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a pretty rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that sent chills right down my spine, even as a 10-year-old. I knew something was wrong with this guy. Nonetheless, we got in his taxi and headed for the pyramids. He continued to try and talk with me and joke around with me the whole ride, something I found to be extremely weird and bold since both my parents were right there. We got super close. There was an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids, and there's a different entrance the taxis can go through. You have to pay to see them. Strange, but true. Our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes, bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free so my parents wouldn't have to pay the extra ticket price. We laughed it off and my parents paid him and said thank you. They began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I left the car, he did too, and directed me toward his trunk. I was confused and thought we may have forgotten something there, so I stayed behind as my parents walked toward the gate, so I could grab whatever I thought we had left behind. The driver popped open the trunk, but there wasn't anything inside. He grabbed my arm and put a hand on my back, trying to push me inside. "I'm getting you in for free," he said over and over again as I resisted my hardest. Naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mom and dad at the top of my lungs, terrified. When they heard me and noticed I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back to the car. When the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, slammed down the trunk, and drove off as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind, knowing that taxi driver had just tried to shove me into his trunk and drove away the second I called out for help. It's scary to think what could have happened to me had he been stronger or more prepared, faster even. He's the reason I'm still terrified of taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and any car service of that nature. I've been dating my girlfriend for about 2.5 years now. She's a small blonde with a positive attitude about basically everything. We both go to college, so we only get to see each other so much. Her college is in New Hampshire, and mine is in Massachusetts. Since she doesn't have a car, I'll drive up to her in my little old red one that I got from my grandmother and pick her up. I'm not a huge fan of this car, but I basically got it for free, so I guess I can't complain too much. I never had an issue making this 1.5-hour drive before, but a few weeks ago I got more than my fill. I was visiting my girlfriend and it was already becoming a rough day. We wanted the dorm room to ourselves, but her bitchy roommate wouldn't leave, so we hung out in the common room instead. After spending most of the day together, we finally called it time for me to head back to my own college. I said goodbye and that I would text her when I got back. It was around 6 o'clock anyways, and it was getting pretty dark outside already, given it was in the middle of winter. I normally take the New Hampshire back roads for a more scenic route, and also to avoid traffic. It doesn't affect the time of traveling at all either, so that's a bit of a plus. Most people who live in or visit New Hampshire know that most of the back roads are not lit well at all. There might only be one streetlight, or perhaps not even any at all. This isn't too much of a problem though, because I can just put on my high beams. After about 30 minutes of driving, I turned down a road that looked as if it was just a wide path. The GPS said I should be going straight for about 7 miles, and due to knowing the way New Hampshire's roads could be, I didn't really think anything of it. The street was like how I mentioned before, and was narrow enough for about 1.5 cars. It was surrounded by the woods, and was not lit with any streetlights at all. I was about 3 or 4 miles in when I saw a man in my high beams just standing there in the middle of the road. He was waving down my car asking for help. The road wasn't big enough for me to pass around him, so I had to stop where I was. The man came around to my driver's side window and gestured for me to roll it down. I wasn't fully thinking straight, so I put my window down about halfway. He He looked like an average 40 to 45-year-old man, but something about him gave off a very disturbing presence. He told me he was having car troubles and asked me to get out of my car and go help him. Now, I'm a 19-year-old and I have an average build with brown surfer-styled hair. None of my physical qualities would signal me knowing anything about cars. When I told him I didn't know anything or how to help him, and that if he really needed help I could call him a mechanic or a tow truck, he kept gesturing to his black rusted pickup truck and insisted I get out there and help him. This started to give me the chills. I wasn't sure what was going on here, but I knew it was bad. As I looked a bit closer, that's when I noticed there was someone crouching behind the truck. The man couldn't tell, but I began to internally panic. My fight-or-flight senses kicked into high gear, and I chose to try something risky. I told the guy I would pull over on the side of the road up ahead and get out to see what I could help him with. That seemed to work. The guy had this huge smile. He backed off from my car, and I stepped as hard as I could on my gas pedal. I sped off and looked in my rearview mirror, only to see both men run out into the middle of the road and just stand there watching me leave. I kept driving as fast as I could until I got off that road and to a nearby gas station where I stopped to call the police. I told the dispatch my experience and asked them if I needed to stick around for questioning. They told me they would send officers out to check the street, and I was fine to continue driving on my way. I called my girlfriend and told her what happened. She was just happy I was safe. I have no idea what those guys' intentions were. I don't think they were actually having car troubles though. Maybe I was going to get carjacked, or maybe it would have been something worse. Needless to say, after that night, I will not be driving the back roads alone at night any longer. I've had lots of creepy encounters during my travels, but I'll start with the most recent one. This is fairly long, as I had 2 encounters basically one after the other. For clarification, I'm an Asian with distinct Asian features, 5 foot 1 inches small and in my 20s. Last year I went to Egypt with a big group of 40. For one night, we stayed at this beautiful villa-style hotel on top of the mountains. The layout for this particular hotel was that there was a very long pool in the middle, surrounded by small villas with about 20 rooms per villa. Our group got assigned the farthest one from the lobby. It was around 10 p.m. when I decided to go out for a walk to watch the stars and all. My grandma, who I was sharing a room with, was very tired, and so she went to sleep early. This meant I went out by myself. I walked around the pool and enjoyed the weather and the night sky. I sat down on one of the benches by the poolside. It was then that I noticed one of the hotel staff, a bag porter who'd help with our luggage when we checked in, approaching me. I didn't really think anything of it. He came by and made some small talk. I brushed it off as him trying to be friendly and courteous to the guests. When he asked where we came from, I answered politely. What he said next then gave me the creeps. He said his friend was looking for a wife from my country. Okay, dude. I laughed it off and lied that I was already married. He asked where my husband was. I kind of panicked and told him my non-existent husband had gotten left behind because he had to work. He took out his phone and called someone, but I guess whoever he was calling wasn't picking up. He told me to wait there, but my spidey senses were tingling on overdrive. I had 2 options: walk back to the villa as quickly as possible, but risk letting this man know the room where I was staying at with my grandma, or walk towards the well-lit lobby, hoping there were people from my group still there. I stood up and started to fast walk to the lobby. The man was still trying to call someone on his phone. He tried to call after me, but I waved goodbye in a hurry and left. When I got to the lobby, I was relieved to see our tour leader, our Egyptian tour guide, and 3 ladies from our group still there. No more creepy hotel staff, or so I thought. In the hotel lobby, they have a bunch of souvenir shops set up. One of the ladies I was close with, B, was browsing inside the papyrus souvenir shop. Our guide had warned us beforehand that the papyrus paintings they sell at this hotel are fake, or generally low-quality tourist trap souvenirs. I went inside the shop to talk to B about that, just in case she'd forgotten or something. Inside the shop was her, me, and 2 salesmen. One of them was standing near the door and blocking the only means of exit. B asked for my opinion between 2 paintings. The salesman standing in front of us told us these paintings had a different pattern show up that glows in the dark. He asked us if we wanted to see it. I firmly said no before B could even answer. I'd had enough for the day and wanted to go back to our room. This persistent salesman said something to the other man standing behind us though, who proceeded to close the door and turn off the light switch. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I didn't like the idea of being in a pitch-black room with 2 men I didn't know. I could also sense that B was panicking as she grabbed onto my wrist. Luckily for us, the door suddenly opened from outside. B's aunt was shouting at us and asking what we were doing. She motioned for us to come outside quickly. I swear, I don't know what would have happened if she didn't open the door at that time. She made a big fuss over it, and the rest of the group walked back to the villa together with our tour leader. On the way back, B's aunt asked us if anything had happened, if our phones and wallets were still with us and all. We checked our belongings and everything seemed fine. No one followed us back to the villa, and I was happy to be checking out the following morning.